together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Come and share with me. Adoption brings our worlds together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Come and share with me. Share with me.
Welcome to the Journey to Josiah podcast. I am your ever so excited host, David D. Marshall, founder and CEO of Journey to Josiah Incorporated. I am so excited to have as my guest, Sam Leeson. Now I'm going to give a little aside. She and I, we met on Instagram and we formed this great friend. She's now my good friend living in Toronto or in Canada somewhere. She'll tell us. And so let me tell you a little bit about Sam. Recognizing the importance of inclusivity and diversity in the world of childbirth and parenting, Sam founded Baby Ready. It is her mission to create a safe and respectful space for members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community to learn about conception, pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum, feeding, and parenting. Sam is committed to empowering and supporting all individuals in their unique journey to becoming parents, and she's proud to be a part of their stories. Sam, thank you so much for joining me from so far away. Your flight landed on time.
Hello, my friend. It's great to talk to you. And yes, I'm just west of Toronto by about 20 minutes.
See, I told y'all she was going to tell us. I just make up things as I go. Just pay me no mind. All right. Thank you so much again. And I'm excited to have this conversation. As I was, as you heard me say in the intro, we had a great, wonderful meeting via Instagram, and I was interviewed on Sam's amazing podcast. And so I will also, just so I don't forget, and I'm going to say this right now, I'll have all of Sam's links in my description, as well as how you can find her podcast, because she has some amazing stories, mine being one of them.
Of course.
And so with that, I decided, I don't really think I know Sam's business. She knows mine. Let me see what I can find out from her. And so you're here today. And again, I thank you for taking the time to join me. And so I just want to kind of start from the beginning. Tell me a bit about Sam Leeson.
Well, I am, as I said, from Ontario, Canada, just west of Toronto now, but I grew up a couple of hours north of Toronto, and it was a much smaller community. The community itself was very stereotypical in the 70s of being a small town. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody's business. You had to be careful. I shouldn't say that. It's not that you had to be careful, but there was a level of expectation that was underwritten in the energy in the air, that it was important to be careful with how you behaved, what you did, what you said, especially in the event that your parent owned a business in town. Because anytime that somebody did something and it got back to everyone else in town, then that could potentially impact how the business worked and was perceived and received. And so I grew up being I was still a kid. I still behaved like a kid. And when I wanted to do something, I did it. And even if I wasn't supposed to. But the one thing that I was pretty careful about was the one thing that people talked about at the side of their mouths and behind a hand and with that knowing wink or nod. And that was about my sexuality. I dated girls on the side. Most of the people who knew me in the small town didn't know anything about my interest in being with girls instead of guys. In fact, I went so far as to date lots of guys to make it appear that that was my preference. And I just dated girls on the side so that I could follow my heart. And then I just did what I think I felt like I was supposed to do. And it's not that anyone said I needed to do it. I need to be clear that no one said you have to marry a man. It was an unwritten rule that you just stuck with the norm. And so I did. I married a guy. We had a couple of kids. And when my eldest was about 11, I realized I couldn't stay in that environment anymore. And there were a lot of variables that went along with it. You and I have talked about those before, not necessarily ones that I want to get into too much now, but suffice it to say that I decided I needed to live my authentic life. I have been since the year my eldest was born, which was 1998. And that breaks my heart to say, mostly because that means I'm a woman in my 50s. But that's hard to say out loud.
No. Let it be hard. See, you all will not be able to see Sam's beautiful face, but it should be hard to say if you didn't look like Sam. So you'll find, I'm gonna put her links there. Y'all go look at this beautiful face and see, and just say, stop this talking like this, ma'am.
You're so sweet. Thank you. I appreciate that. But it was 1998 that my eldest was born. And I came away from that birth feeling disempowered, feeling as though decisions were made on my behalf without my consultation, and feeling as though there had to be a better way. There had to be something that I could do. Now, when I was in university, I was a women's studies student. I was also a poli-sci student, but that didn't go anywhere. But a women's studies degree is what I went to school for. And I did some work with the obstetrics and gynecology department at the university I went to school at, and helped educate second-year med students on how to perform pelvic exams for females and people with uteruses. And it really made me know that there are some care providers out there who really do want to make sure that their patients get the best possible care and that they are included and involved in their care. Now, bear in mind, this is 25 years ago. Medicine has come a long way and not so far, both at the same time.
Yeah.
As with everything in life. And so it was just towards the end of my pregnancy, I heard the word doula. And somebody explained to me that that was a labor support provider, someone who worked alongside someone who was birthing a child, both through the pregnancy, the labor, the birth, and the postpartum period. And I thought, okay, I think that that's something that speaks to me. And it's helping me support individuals on a path that they don't even necessarily know they need to be supported on. I went to my first birth as a doula on December 21st, 1998. Yes, that child's almost 25. And I came home from that birth and I looked at my ex and I said, this is what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. And they looked at me and went, how do you know that? You've done one of these births. And I just said, I don't know. I just know. So I've been a birth worker for 25 years. I've had the honor of being present for the arrival into the world of over 500 little humans. I have 500. Taught prenatal 500. Yes. And I'm technically retired from that part. And as I say that, I attended a birth in August. I've got somebody due in the spring. Actually, I've got a couple people due in the spring. So I'm not very good at retiring because I love it so much.
And that's we should love what we do, right?
And that's it, because I grew up hearing that my dad loved what he did. He owned his own business, but he loved absolutely everything about what he did. And when he stopped loving it so ferociously, he retired and started doing something else. And I guess that's sort of where I'm at, is that I just love it so ferociously still that I'm not very good at retiring from it. But I am now able to incorporate other avenues and aspects within it. So I attended births for the longest time. Then I increased my education. I took a course through concurrent with a program in a local college to become a childbirth educator. That was a 3-year program. It wasn't some weekend course. And I've had something like 10,000 people come through my prenatal classes over the last probably 20 years. So I've touched on some people over the years, and I'm continuously learning and growing. I love the learning and growing part, but it was after I came out, a friend of mine who is a midwife locally, we worked together in the past, we've attended births together in the past. Midwifery in Ontario is a regulated profession. They are primary care providers for people who are having babies and pregnancies that are considered low risk. So there aren't any doctors involved in those pregnancies. And she and I have worked together several times with different patients and clients. And she called me one day and said, "Are you doing work primarily or exclusively for the 2S LGBTQIA+ community?" And I said, "No, I kind of work with everybody." And she said, "Well, why not?" And I thought, that's a really good question, because one of the things that we know is that representation matters.
Mm-hmm.
And working alongside someone with whom we don't have to share our explanation about our identity goes a long way in creating comfort and relaxation, so that we can truly get to comfortably work with somebody that we can trust.
Yes.
We don't have to explain anything. It just is. So it was really about that time that I changed the direction of Baby Ready and threw an LGBTQ at the end of it for all of my socials, so that people knew where the focus of my work was. And it's been amazing to work alongside people within the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, understand their stories from wherever they're coming from, whether they're adopting children privately or through a public agency, whether they're hiring a surrogate, whether they're birthing children on their own and they need to use donors of some kind, known or unknown. It's just been so empowering for me to be able to grow my knowledge base and share the resources that I have with the world. And that was sort of how my podcast bloomed.
Wow. What I'm hearing from you is there is, as should be for any well-lived life, an evolution.
Mhm.
And everything, it has its beginning, and it's not yet ended because you're still here.
Mhm.
So it's still yet happening, and you're growing and changing with the day, I'm sure. What you said to me in the beginning struck me, because I also think for those of us in our community, we've had that pause in the beginning in terms of not so much being concerned about ourselves being who we are, but concerned about others. And most of those others would be our families.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting just to kind of get that from a broader perspective, because we tend to kind of think of ourselves when we live in different spaces and places as living completely different ways, but really it's not that different. I think of myself living here in the States and in Maryland, which is still kind of considered a Southern state, having these values of, oh no, don't say anything, don't do anything. And it's very interesting to hear that those values are shared in other spaces abroad. And so you said, with that, you were married, you had children. How many children do you have?
I birthed 2 children myself, both boys, and both identify as boys, as men as well. And then I have a stepdaughter, because I only birth males. So I had to get my wife to birth a female for me so that I could be a step parent to a girl.
I love how you picked that. Right. Now, Sam does amazing work. You all hear it. She births males. I
Yeah.
love it. I love all of it. And and so you said you were married, you birthed males. Let me ask you this. This is just kind of a way to the side kind of thing, but you were married for how long?
16 years.
16 years. So then your children were pretty grown when
Mhm.
you left the marriage. When you was that hard having the conversation with your children? Was that probably the hardest I don't want to project anything. How was that?
Um,
Because it was a twofold thing. It's our family changing,
mhm.
and hey, and looky here,
I'm coming out.
mommy just might be gay, so tell me about that.
Um, I think that we made the decision to sit down and tell the children. I had told my ex that things were finished probably a month before we said anything to the kids. I thought for a long time that I might just stay in the marriage, but not have any kind of a physical relationship. Instead, would just have a partner on the side kind of thing, which would do no service to me or to someone else. I recognize that retrospectively. I think at the time I was just feeling desperate not to upend my children's lives. And so after about a month, when it became clear that that wasn't going to be a tenable option, we sat down with the kids. I explained to them that I still loved them very much. They were still my reason for existing, and that I needed to leave. I didn't want them to have to leave the space that they had grown up in, that they knew as a familiar space when everything else in the world was changing. I was the one that was changing, so I was the one that was leaving, and I was rewriting the rules. And that part probably was the hardest part for the kids, was that just their day-to-day was going to change. It wasn't going to be the same. The me coming out part was kind of inconsequential to them. They had grown up around, actually, they had spent lots of time with the person who would end up being, who is now my wife, because we'd known her for a long time. But it was just nothing new or different to be queer in our house. We, when we went to Washington a year or two before I ended the marriage, we went to HRC in Washington. We brought back our shirts and our flags and everything else. I mean, the writing truly was on the wall. Why nobody just didn't slap us all and say, "Come on already." But I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
So that part didn't really faze them. In fact, my eldest has said to me since that it probably was easier for him to process that I was in a same-sex relationship after the marriage ended, and that it didn't end because from what he knows, because of my ex, but more because I needed to honor who I am. And that's a big part of it. That brings me some peace, knowing that that's how they feel about it and how they felt about it. That could have been a really difficult situation, probably, had they not had the same exposure either to the queer community that they'd had. But as I say, my wife and I met when I taught her prenatal classes 18 years ago, I guess now, because it was when she was pregnant with my stepdaughter, who will be 18 soon.
Wow.
And yes, I do distinctly remember her walking in with her pillow to my prenatal classes at the hospital, and we just struck up a friendship. And I don't know why. I mean, energies connect for the reason that energies connect, and often people don't know why. It wasn't something I ever did. I never really formed close connections to the people in my classes. They're all lovely people. I'm sure they're all lovely people. I just didn't, that would have been a lot of energy for me to give. You can imagine with a number like 10,000, that's a lot. That'd be a lot of connections to have.
Mm-hmm.
So we built up a friendship. And when she was on maternity leave, we got together, because in Canada, we do things a little bit right. And we've got up to 18 months maternity leave after someone gives birth. But at the time that she birthed, it was 12 months. So we had lots of time to create a friendship. We didn't actually start dating until years later. My stepdaughter was almost 4 when my wife and I started dating. But yeah, so yeah, I think it was okay for the boys from that perspective, which made life a little easier for me.
exposure is everything.
Oh, for sure.
And really what we know is that bigotry and hatred and ignorance all around is really birthed out of lack of exposure.
Right.
So that's amazing. It's just, sometimes we think about it as a little different when, like, I think about coming out and my parents never really having an issue with anyone from our community, but it still hit differently because I'm their child.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you have that kind of dynamic that, oh, it's fine for everybody else, but I don't know about you. So that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I know that had to give you peace in an already
Mm-hmm.
very tenuous situation
Mm-hmm.
there. Now I want to move ahead into something else that you said in terms of your background. And so you were a women's studies major.
Yes.
And what you said in there was very, very, it stuck to me. Now the thought is almost going out of my head in terms of how you put it. So you'll correct my language there. But was it at that point that you were, how did you term that? Oh my goodness. In terms of the examination process, what did you call that?
Right. So I worked as a standardized patient in the obstetrics and gynecology program at the university I went to as a simulated patient to teach second-year med students how to do pelvic exams.
Now, I have to ask you this. Is that a part of the women's studies program?
No, it was completely separate. But because I was going to the university and because women's health and wellness and opportunities and everything was in my head because of the courses I was taking, I saw a poster, because in those days nothing came electronically.
Right.
They were still chipping it in stone, remember?
Absolutely. I have some on my bookshelf.
Right. There was a poster that I saw in the grad lounge, because I went to university a little bit older than the other students. So I was in the grad lounge, and it was announcing an opportunity for people to earn some money through the standardized patient program. Actually, I had the best time working in that program, because there were so many of the theater majors and things like that were also working in this program. But
wow.
The idea was that if we brought in actual humans for students to learn with and from, then the opportunities, especially when it comes to gynecology and vulnerability. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about a body part and a series of body parts that generally are only seen by the person who owns them, if they choose to look at them, a care provider, and potentially a partner. And so it's a pretty vulnerable space. And if someone is going to a care provider to expose their pelvic floor parts, then they're going to feel some kind of way. Right? Especially if it's an emergent situation. Somebody comes into the emergency room, they're having extreme lower quadrant pain, and they need somebody to assess whether they've had a ruptured cyst on the ovary or anything, all kinds of different things. And then somebody has to do a pelvic exam, and this is the first pelvic exam they've done on a human, because all they've had before that are models, like simulated models. Then we felt that it was important, and the program felt that it was important to make sure that these students had the opportunity to at least have one safe space to do that in as a first time, ask their questions, and figure out what's what and what they're looking for, and how to do it in a respectful manner. So one of the things that was really important, I have to say, I'll tell you this really, really quick story because it's super cute. Very first day I'm doing the job, I'm working with somebody that I really am still connected to more than 25 years later. And the students come in pairs, and we worked in pairs. One was the clothed instructor and one was the simulated patient. We would trade those roles back and forth. And the first student knows that this is a brand new program, a little bit nervous, and he's, going to wash his hands. and is shaken as he's going to the sink in the corner of the room, and asked if he needed to take off his watch. And I said, and I looked at him with big eyes and thought, okay, well, this is the time to break the ice. I said, honey, if you're going that far, you've gone too far. You don't need to take off your watch. And that just sort of set the tone for the whole class, and for every class we taught together. And it was great. They learned all the things, how to use their hands, what language to use. If you've got someone laying in front of you very cautious and they've got a blanket over their legs, but you know they've got nothing on underneath, then you need to be very conscious about what their history might be that you don't know, and how scared they might be, and what pain they're feeling and everything else. So how you ask them to drop the blanket when they're ready, to relax their knees against your hands so that they are in control of everything, and instead of saying spread your legs, and you know what I mean? Like, it's little things like that that go a really long way to help creating a safe environment in what can feel like a very vulnerable, obviously, situation. So it was a fantastic way to kind of keep myself going financially a little bit through through school. And then I did medical exams and things like that. So I didn't just do that. I pretended to be a paralyzed person at one point for a physio exam that they were doing. I've done a pharmacology exam where I ran out of my medication and I needed a pharmacist to just give me some. And obviously they're not supposed to.
Right.
All kinds of different things.
You know what, when I listen to you discuss the that whole experience of the I'm going to keep going to the pelvic exams.
Yes.
What I'm thinking about, I don't know, and this is probably one of those really neat things, given that you're in Canada. You know, when we think about here in the States, and what I hear a lot of from women here is kind of the lack of sensitivity in these spaces. You know, when you're having to have those exams, a lot of the time it's still a very male dominated kind of space to be in. And so what I love about what I heard is that I think you say that you also kind of helped to guide and teach, well, the young man with the watch, of course.
Yes.
But I'm sure that you, being a woman, really, there was another layer there that was invaluable, because you, as males, and we all have to know, not to say that you shouldn't do these, work in these different areas, but you have to understand what you don't know. Be very conscious of those things. And so I'm sure that coming from the female perspective, what you gave to them was just, and do you have any kind of story, I would say, where maybe one of your male students said something to you about that, or how maybe you influenced him in the work that he was able to do, and I'm sure successfully?
I have I mean, most of them left the class and didn't always say stuff to us in the class. I think it was so intense of a learning experience, because it's a hands-on experiential learning. Both students have the opportunity to learn, and it can feel the amount of gratitude that we heard them expressing afterwards, not to us, but to the program coordinator, how grateful they were to be able to have the opportunity to learn in a safe environment so that they could treat everyone with dignity and respect that they worked alongside. And many of them would say, I have a sister, I would hope that she would get the same kind of care that you're teaching us to provide to our patients, and things like that. And those are the kinds of stories that mean the most to us. The other stories that caught me off guard, that really still sit with me to this day, were the number of young women in the program coming through and saying that they had never felt their own cervix. They had never looked at their own body. And it's different for women. Obviously, we can't stand in front of a mirror and see what what our body has to offer.
Yeah.
And then helping them understand that that was something that was really important for them to do, that the easiest way for them to know what they liked, what they didn't like, what felt safe, what didn't feel safe, what was normal and what wasn't normal, was to actually experiment with themselves. And it made me sad that, I mean, for some, it was cultural, that they had never done it because it was expected that you just didn't do that.
Yes.
But I think that so often it is just anything to do with the female genitalia is just constantly sexual. I'm not a guy, so I truly can't say. I wasn't born with a phallus. I don't know. But I feel like it's been made to be dirty more for females than it has for males in terms of having to be inside their own body to explore. And that makes me sad.
I can definitely see that. But then, as we think about all of the double standards, because there just are countless double standards, I can see that. It does always seem to be where in things that I've heard on shows and just in a regular conversation, that women always have this I don't want to project, but it almost seems like an insecurity based on what has been imposed on them socially,
right,
and by men. I don't know how one goes and steps into somebody else's lane in that way, but it seems to be very commonplace. With that, though, where I'm also intrigued is that level of medical training here in the States. You would have to be in medical school, I'm thinking. So what is the difference there in terms of what you all have to have in terms of credentials in order to practice and this, and what do you call when you're doing it, what is your title?
So we were standardized patient. It was the standardized patient program. So we were standardized patients. So we received training, extensive training with the coordinator of the program, who was one of the heads of obstetrics and gynecology at the hospital, and went through things extensively. So we also all had to have a pelvic exam with the program director. And so we just all did it as our annual PAP, our annual pelvic exam. There was always somebody else in the room so that he could make sure that there wasn't a medical concern with us. And not all of us saw him. Some of us saw colleagues of his as much as anything to make sure that we weren't going in there to present as a standardized patient and we have cysts or we have something else going on. So they needed to know we were healthy going in. And then once he determined that the group of us were all healthy, then we were taught what language to use in terms of what parts were, we could describe to them how to find the parts that they needed to find. And it wasn't a big, long exam. These students these exams were pretty short. It was more about making sure that they could find ovaries, they could find the cervix, they knew how to use a speculum. They weren't learning to use that for the first time on an emergency room patient or something. And then it kind of moved from there. And then an external, just a visual, how do things look? Is there any swelling? Is there any lesions? Is there anything else? That kind of thing. So it was a very concentrated education that we got to be able to share that education. And then they went back to their obstetrics and gynecology classes with their professors to learn more about. It's almost like watching a video in class and then having your teacher then expand upon what it is you've watched, so that your education more comes from what is outside of what you saw them. An opportunity for experiential learning was what the idea was, so that it stuck in their head a little bit more.
That's incredible. And so I'm assuming that you completed your women's studies degree. And where did you see yourself going in terms of where did you see yourself in terms of women's studies?
I didn't really know.
Okay.
I did a lot of work, volunteer work while I was in school with the local sexual assault center, and did some fundraising for them and campaigning for them. And so I think my hope at the time was that that would be kind of where I ended up working. But I was pregnant in my last year at school. And so my world shifted that year, and school ended and I had a baby, and then actually did a couple more medical exams, not pelvic exams. I was doing just regular medical exams where students would come in and I would have whatever prescribed ailment I was supposed to have, and there would be a doctor sitting in the room as they're grading the students as they're writing these medical exams. And so I did a couple of those in the first year after I gave birth. But that was really when I sort of thought, okay, well, this is my evolution. Now I'm going from women's studies. And I guess the reason I was so focused on women's health and wellness in school was because I'm supposed to be a doula, I guess. And I didn't even know that existed.
Right. And so, and you know what, I hate to go backwards, but there is something important that you said that I also want to make sure that I repeat, because it was very important. In terms of when you go back to the language that had to be used when these exams were taking place, because as you said, we don't know what one's background is and the trauma and all of that. And so I love that. And I don't know, because obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but I've never been in any kind of training like this. And obviously now this is obvious. I'm not a woman, so I have not had the experience of having any kind of exam and knowing how one could be treated, and possibly just as, I hate to say it this way, but as a object of sorts, and not being humanized. And so I love that there was that discussion in terms of how to approach outside of the vocabulary, which should be a standardized thing. But to me, the maybe not so standard conversation is how to have conversation so that women in your care are feeling cared for. So I love that. Now, when we go, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the doula part. So you said you had not heard of doula until you were pregnant, yes?
Right. Yes.
So tell me your experience. So how did you hear about it? What was that?
I signed up for prenatal classes through the region, and it was being taught by a nurse in the community. And it was probably the class where we were talking about comfort measures and coping strategies through labor. And she really kind of mentioned the word doula in passing. It was something she didn't really give a lot of focus on, but she did describe it to say that it was a woman who was hired by the couple or the individual who was having the baby to support that person birthing. And at the time, language was not evolved. And so it was always only women that were giving birth. And so she was saying that doulas were there to support the woman giving birth and offering physical, emotional, and informational support. And so I often joke and say that I work from the waist up. Care providers work from the waist down.
Okay.
And I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that designation. But I do have several years of education. So I do bring a lot of information and educational support to somebody I was talking to somebody this week who was told that they have placenta previa, which simply means, it's not simple at all, but that means is that the placenta that's keeping baby alive inside the uterus is sitting on top of the cervix, so that if that person was to start to dilate and the cervix would start to open so that the baby could be birthed through the cervix, the placenta would be birthed first. And that's baby's oxygen and blood supply support. So it's a risky situation if you don't know that it's there.
Yeah.
It can change during pregnancy depending on the location of the placenta and other things. So we had a really good educational conversation this week so that I could provide some guidance and encourage some questions that this person could ask of their care provider during their next call, so that this parent has the opportunity to make the best and most informed decisions possible for their care and their path moving forward.
That's amazing. So the doula is that, as you said, waist up support for an expectant parent. And you were, I'm assuming here, you were pregnant with your oldest son when you became introduced to the concept of a doula. And so, and then you eventually became one, yeah?
Yes, I took some classes and then the idea was really, as much as anything with doula care at the time, was really a matter of getting your hands dirty, like getting in there and offering your services. So the first 3 or 4 births that I attended in that role and in that capacity, I did as a volunteer. I just went and offered my services to be able to gain almost like an apprenticeship, to gain the inside knowledge of how things could unfold.
Yeah.
And then it was after that, I probably, it was before I became pregnant with my second child, that I thought I need more. And I learned about a program through Women's College Hospital and Humber College. So a local hospital and college were collaborating to create a program for childbirth education, to make sure that the educators that they were releasing into the world were truly educated about childbirth, because there are lots of childbirth educator programs you can do on a weekend. You read a few books, you attend a class online or in person for a day or two, and you're a childbirth educator. And they were like, no, we need this to be more than that. And from that, I was hired by a local hospital, because I took that program. I was hired by a local hospital to be their primary educator. And I was teaching 5-6 days a week, prenatal classes.
So let me ask you, with this, it's kind of just making me think so much about what's so different between Canada and the United States. And we always, especially when talking about childbirth, and we talk a lot about the differences here between what happens between white women and Black women in childbirth, and that the instances of Black women succumbing during childbirth are so much higher. Now, can we say a portion of that? Now, one cannot control, and I don't want anyone to think that I am saying this because it'll sound very crazy, but do you think that a portion of why some women may have more catastrophic things happen is because what I'm hearing from you is there's a lot of teaching that seems to happen, and is that's your regular regimen there?
No.
For those who are willing to.
Right. It's for people who want to sign up, because it's not free. It's well, the healthcare part of it is covered. So it's, if when you go into the hospital to have your baby, that's all covered. But if you want to take a class, even if it's run through the hospital, to learn childbirth education, you have to pay for that. It's out of pocket. So it is very much still segregated by those who can afford it and those who can't. And I'm going to say that, yes, there are lots of differences between our healthcare systems between Canada and the US. And certainly every president you've ever had has been very vocal for or against it about those differences. But what I can tell you is that when it comes to outcomes, maternal outcomes in terms of birth for Black women versus white women, I don't think that it's a whole lot different here than there. Because this healthcare is free, sure. So maybe it's a little bit better here because they have access to seeing someone without being out of pocket for that, to at least get basic obstetrical care throughout the pregnancy. But in terms of how they're treated when they get to the hospital, how they're believed when they get to the hospital, whether or not they get the care that they deserve while they're in the hospital. All of those things, I think, are just the same here as there, because unfortunately, lack of education and bias exists.
Yes.
And so we can't, those are the pieces that I unfortunately can't control.
Yeah, yeah. But what you said, which is huge for any American politician who could potentially listen to this, is the differences in the fact that there is free health care there.
Mhm.
And so with that, then there is greater access, because obviously if you don't have access, then that does increase the likelihood that something may go wrong.
Yes.
And even not even with the birth parent, but with the baby or both. So if there is not any accessibility, excuse me, then therein lies a huge problem.
Right.
And so kind of moving forward in that, you became a doula, and you had it would now, and I don't want to have my numbers mixed up, the 10,000. So you were teaching classes. Now, were
Yes.
you were teaching as a doula when you had the 10,000?
So I was, yes, I was both a doula and a certified childbirth educator.
Wow.
So that's what the schooling gave me, was a certified childbirth educator designation. And so that's why I was hired by the hospital. When I was teaching at the hospital, I was often teaching anywhere from 15 to 20 couples at a time.
Whoa.
I know the classes were huge.
It sounds like there is a huge value there placed on doulas, because that's not something I hear a whole lot of here. Like, I've heard of it because for some strange reason, I used to like to watch childbirth shows. Now, I had no desire to help anyone, but I used to joke and say, well, if you do go into labor, I've watched enough. There was a show here called Midwifery or something like that, and I would be busy watching the midwives. So I was like, well, I might have some kind of clue besides boiling some water like you see on the soap operas, this
Right.
nonsense. But but so where I find that to be very, very interesting and very unique, I would say, is that there seems to be value placed on somewhat, I don't want to call it this, but correct the term because it might be wrong, kind of alternative methods of care. Like, I don't see that as an alternative, but there is,
Right.
but some more supportive care. Help me with that. I might be butchering this.
But you're not really, you're not far off. No, there is more respect, I think, for the most part. And part of it is really, like with anything, it depends on why you're doing it. If you're getting in it to change the world and be adversarial and be controversial because you have a found belief that this is how things need to play out, and a lot of people get into it for that reason. And to a certain extent, when I first got into it, as I said before, I had an experience after the birth of my first where I felt disempowered, and it was important to me to empower my clients. I had an idea in my head, but I very quickly learned, and I think part of that came from taking the program, the childbirth education program that I was taking, was that my vision for birth was my vision for birth, and my experience in birth was my experience in birth, but that I should never place my experience or my expectations onto my clients. And that was really, and that still is one of the things that I see separating me from some, especially newer doulas, well-intentioned, obviously get into it because it's hard work. I mean, it's often being on call for weeks on end, being up for hours on end, physically demanding, emotionally demanding. So I don't mean to minimize their abilities, but when you've been in it for a period of time, you have that capability to step back and say, that's not the decision I would make. but I have provided you with this information, and this information. And from that, you've made this decision. So I will honor and respect that and support you in that decision, because this is your journey, your process, your body. When care providers see doulas who work in this kind of capacity to really work alongside and support the person birthing and the care team, so that we all work as a collective unit, which is why I got out of teaching at the hospital and started teaching more for midwifery practices in the last sort of 6 or 8 years. Those doulas tend to be pretty well received by care teams and hospitals alike. And so when I was interviewing for the hospital and I was able to say, this is my education experience, this is my personal experience, these are my philosophies, and they would say, yes, we'd like to bring you on to teach for our patients in our hospital. There are very few hospitals that will take doulas to be in that role because they want someone who has the education. And I had more education than a weekend course, but they also liked my philosophy, when that was not to, it was always to encourage people to ask their questions. So if you don't like what your doctor's saying, ask them questions to clarify why they're saying that. Same with your midwife or your family doc, whoever's catching your baby, but to do it in such a way that I could provide information so that they were making informed decisions and decisions that would support them and their child. And so, yes, it is rare for doulas to be in the role that I'm in. I do have a couple of friends who teach at another hospital downtown Toronto who are doulas as well, and they're not nurses or midwives. But so it really depends on the institution, but it also really depends on the person who's doing the work and what their philosophies are. And now, power to the people who are super, super strong in their convictions that this is how birth should be. They're going to be working with the clients who need someone to be adversarial and confrontational for them, right? Not everybody needs that. That's what some people are looking for when they're looking for a doula or a support person, because we all want somebody who's going to come in the way we need them to come in.
It's so interesting as I'm listening to this, and clearly I don't have the power to do any of this. I'm like, this should just be standard, a part of the whole program, because the bottom line of it is you need to understand the whole entire process. Like you said, knowing what to ask, because so many people don't know what to ask because they don't know what to expect. They don't know what goes into this. And so being able to have a working knowledge so that you can ask the right questions, and also probably be more informed on what is going to be the best method for you in terms of, do I want to be at a hospital? Do I want to be at home? Do I want to be at a pool? Do I want to be wherever? All the different options that are available. So I feel like these are, it sounds like it's like a very necessary thing that should just really be universal. But that's me talking, and I have no power to do anything. But I think this is good. So let's trudge ahead a little bit further in. So I'm probably going to jump ahead in some time here. You, where did Baby Ready fit into all of this? And I think you touched on a little bit in the intro here, but talk a little bit more about where that, because initially, like you said too, you were not working exclusively with members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. But Baby Ready was birthed some way. So tell us a little bit more about the birthing of that.
It's Baby Ready is been an evolution for 25 years. It was hand-in-hand prenatal services, and then I guess probably 16 or 17 years ago, for a period of time, I worked alongside another individual. She had birthed a child with me and really wanted to do labor support, and so took some classes, and we together put together Baby Ready. And it was, and we came up with the name. Actually, I believe she came up with the name because, I'm baby ready. I'm, I was marriage ready. I was house ready. Now I'm baby ready. And that's where it came from. And then after a short period of time, realized that wasn't necessarily the path she wanted to take. And that's not uncommon in the profession. There's a lot of commitment needed to be able to commit to this kind of work. And so then it was just me doing Baby Ready. And it's funny because as I'm describing to you the role that I play as a doula when it comes to somebody birthing a child themselves, I think the evolution has really moved Baby Ready now to be, as an organization that works, as you say, and as I have said, primarily with the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. It has been now me being more a doula for people who, through different facets of their life, through the adoption journey, through the surrogacy journey, through the parenting journey. So I'm not just a birth doula who will help with pregnancy, labor, and birth, but I doula all kinds of different things. And there are several different people who will give doulas a different label. There are death doulas now for people who know that they've been diagnosed with a terminal illness and their family to help them navigate that journey. That's not a path I'm on, but I deeply respect the work that they do. There are abortion doulas. There are all kinds of different doulas. And I really feel like what I have done with my evolution of education is constantly trying to talk with people like yourself. You and I connected some time ago, and I'm constantly learning about the different ways that different people choose to create their families, and how I can support them on that journey.
That's amazing. And so even the concept is, as you gave us a broader definition, if you will, of doula, because commonly you would just think of them just in the birthing setting. And so you said how doulas really kind of cover many, many different areas from life to end of life care and everything almost in between with this. When you founded Baby Ready, well, I guess I would say co-founded, right? Is that
at the time? Yep.
At the time, your main goal at that point was really to work with those who are pregnant, yes? Or now let me ask you this though. So there are those who were pregnant. Now, what support, if any, do you offer to those who are thinking about it? Do people come to you for that if they're just like, I think I want to get pregnant or have a child? Because you said there's surrogacy, but you know,
they do now. They
okay.
do now. I have done some education about fertility awareness, and so understanding how the female reproductive system works in terms of knowing how to recognize ovulation, how to recognize days of fertility, and that kind of thing. So, and how to set the body up to increase the likelihood that conception would be possible. So yes, I do work alongside, and these days, especially working with couples with two uteruses where they know that they're going to need to use a donor with sperm. Known or unknown is that in this part of the process irrelevant. And so talking to them about who they should see beforehand, what care providers do they want to see to understand what's going on in their body, what tests do they want to ask their family doctor to order for them so that they can be aware of it ahead of time. Talking to them about what they're looking for in terms of a fertility clinic, where they want that to be. Do they need it to be to us LGBTQIA plus community? Is location more important to them than being queer friendly? All of those kinds of things. So I do a lot of consultations with individuals on the fertility side of things as well.
And so, and let me go, because we didn't really kind of dig a little bit more into it becoming more specialized. That's the term I'm using for really now being more concentrated on our community. And I remember you said that there was a friend of yours who really just asked you the question, so why not?
And she's not queer, just for the record. She just asked.
I wish the people could have seen my face just now when I just looked like, what? Okay, because I honestly just assumed that, but it's funny though. And I shouldn't have assumed, because even when it pertains to Journey to Josiah, one of my board members who is not queer is the one who said to me, why are you just not exclusively? So, we have to, maybe there's more credit to be given to the allies who
Right?
might be a little bit more forward thinking than we are sitting here. Isn't
Yeah.
that something? But I love it though. So in deciding to actually take, because you had the conversation, it doesn't mean that you had to actually do it.
Mhm.
What then was, why did you decide, you know what, maybe I will now be more specialized in the community, not just because I'm a part of the community, because
Mhm.
I'm Black and I don't go to all Black events,
Right. Yeah.
but still, what made you say, okay, you know what, I think this is what I should do?
I think it was the feedback I'd had from people in my classes, my wife included. It was, we will both forever be grateful that she took my prenatal class and came
Mhm.
in as a lesbian to my prenatal classes and took the class. But it was a class where she was the other. And so my reason for doing it was because we are othered so often in our lives.
Yeah.
That, if we don't have to be othered, if we can be in a safe space, we can be surrounded by people who are just members of our community who also happen to be wanting to create a family or starting their family or growing their family, then that just to me, that just resonated. I mean, she and I had talked countless times over the years that we've been together about wanting to create community so that my stepdaughter, our daughter, could see other families that look like hers,
Mhm.
that she wasn't the only one. And I love that I've got a Facebook group for local queer parents who
Mhm.
want to meet other, local queer parents, and I facilitated that.
Okay, so
And
wait a minute. What's that called? We won't tell the people. What is that Facebook group called?
well, let me figure it out for sure,
Oh,
because I haven't been on it for so
you haven't been
long.
on it for a while.
No,
Okay.
because it just comes up in my it
I'm
just comes
sorry
up
to
on my
take you out of
list.
that train of thought, but it was like, oh no, that's major.
Yeah. But it is important. And the group is LGBTQ plus parents in the Burlington, Oakville, Greater Toronto, Hamilton area.
Thank you.
And
And I'll make sure I put that in the description too. We'll
thank you.
coordinate all of the notes so everything
Yes.
can be there in writing.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
absolutely.
Sam.
But it was really just, I mean, that piece was bred off the fact that we wanted other people to have access to a resource that we didn't see or have. And so I think for me, that's what fuels my want to do this. There are doulas on every corner, and there's some very, very extremely talented peers of mine that I consider friends, who are in the same profession, who do phenomenal work. But over time, we've had conversations, and they will often say to me, I have a queer couple that's looking for somebody. Do you want to do they, they'd like to talk to you. Do you want to talk to them? Are you open to talking to them? Whereas I have, same, I talk to different people, and then, a heterosexual couple reach out to me, and I'll say, I'm happy to work with you, but would you like to also meet these other people? Because at the end of the day, it needs to be you working with the person who works best with you in your circumstances. And so I think I think we need to support each other and know our strengths. And so, yeah, for me, it was a no-brainer when she said that. I was like, yeah, I need to work with my community. I need to support my community, and they need to know that I'm here.
Yeah. And I kind of been going back to the thought process when you were in class and the pelvic exam piece, the vocabulary, because with our community, there is a lot of vocabulary
Sure.
that is very different. And so when you're in a space where there's someone who can speak directly
Yeah.
to where you are, who you are, that makes the difference. Because then I'm assuming that depending on the scenario, the circumstance, raising your hand to ask certain kinds of questions can be very, very uncomfortable. And not to mention that that person teaching just may not know the answer.
Right.
because there
Exactly.
are some other complexities here.
Sure.
So that need became, I'm sure then it was just an amazing thing for people to find out that there was that place where they didn't have to feel like you could maybe just get a little bit, but not everything,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so with that, you have worked with 500 families in terms of supporting them through Baby Ready, yes?
Right. Well, it may not be 500. It's been over 500 babies,
Births.
but some of them I have worked with for multiple babies. One family, I've been there for 4 of their births. So, that brings the number down by 4 in terms of number of families, because it's 4 babies, same family. But yes, it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's when they call me back and say, I need you here for the next time too, just that extra gift, right?
So can you tell me now I kind of want to get into the nitty-gritty of the births. I don't know, I might go ahead and be somebody's doula or midwife yet, because this is intriguing me. Can you tell me what is the scariest experience you've had as a doula?
I've had some really fast births. I had one birth I went to with a couple who was having their second child with me, and by the time I got to the house, I couldn't get the birthing parent dressed because their water had broken. They were changing their clothes, but contractions were coming so quickly that they were struggling to get dressed. And I wasn't sure we were going to make it to the hospital. So I rode with them to the hospital, which is something I never do. I always want my own vehicle at the hospital so I can leave when I'm finished. And I rode with them to the hospital. And it was about 1:00 in the morning. It was snowing, not heavily, but snowing enough that we needed to exercise caution. So I just said, stop at the red lights and then proceed with caution if nobody's coming, but we need to get to the hospital. If a police officer pulls you over, then they will just escort us to the hospital. So don't worry about that. And so we just kept going and got to the hospital, and the baby was born minutes after we got into the labor and delivery department. So, that was probably one of them. And it wasn't even scared so much as I just did not want this child to be born in the van on the way to the hospital. Either at home or in hospital, one of the two. I could facilitate the process if I needed to in an emergency situation, but I just didn't want to do it on the side of the road.
Yeah.
But I've unfortunately, you don't do this for as long as I have without seeing catastrophic outcomes. And, I would have to say that as much as my work is the best work in the world and it doesn't get better when it's good, my work is the hardest work and the worst work in the world when it doesn't go well. And it's heartbreaking. And those families are families I'm still connected to. I'll forever be connected to those families, some of whom have gone on to have babies again, and some of whom have chosen not to. But it can be a lot.
I can imagine. And so I have a twofold question where that is concerned. When you have had those situations that did not turn out in the way that was hoped, how are you able to then give further support to them? What are some things that you
certainly stay with them through the labor and birth process, because at that point it still needs to happen, even if the baby's not going to be born alive. For my own peace of mind, I spend time with them afterwards and attend services with them, because I need that closure, and they've always said they need me there for that closure too. I talk about how to make their bodies as comfortable as possible as they go through the postpartum journey on their body, in terms of milk coming in and bleeding after birth and physically recovering from that process. I connect them with other people I know who have had a similar grief process that they've had to navigate, so that they know someone that they can talk to, just to ask questions of, is this normal? Did you feel this? I put them in touch with a podcast that I know that's hosted by someone I know who lost a child at 8 days old, and whose podcast is made up of conversations with parents who've experienced loss, reading materials, things like that, and always encourage them to seek professional help, because it's not a path anybody is ever supposed to take, and so no one is ever prepared for it.
And a vulnerable moment for you, how do you support you after that?
It's a good question. My wife will argue that I don't do enough to support myself. I don't know. I do see my therapist and get therapy. But that's just, I mean, it's just a continuation of what I already do to care for myself. I'm probably one of the hardest, other than the first that I ever went through, one of the hardest was helping a couple bring home their babies from Panama. They were away on vacation, and she birthed early to twins in Panama, and then had to find a way to get those babies home so that she could go through the process here of having a service and a commitment ceremony and things like that. So it's sometimes it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful that they've asked me to be a part of their journey, even when it's painful like that.
Yeah, that's just listening to that is unfathomable in terms of I can't imagine I on so many levels
Right.
there. And
Yeah.
I feel like for those of us who are in the positions of I don't want to use the word caregiving, but I often say when we're pouring out in this way and we're supporting in this way, it's so important that we also have our places and spaces to be refilled, because it can be a lot, because not everything is going to be wonderful and perfect. And so
Yep.
how do we support ourselves so that, because I can say that I have not had, obviously it's a different thing that I do, but just in people along the way who are discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
And how am I able to support them? But then some of it for me, I internalize, I'm such an empath.
Mm-hmm.
And then I might leave the conversation like that scenario just happened to me. So
yes,
it's so important for us to make sure that we
do our
that
part for
work for
ourselves.
ourselves.
Yep, I fully agree.
And so you have, and I'm going back into your bio here. We talked about conception, we talked about pregnancy, we talked about labor, birth, postpartum. What do you do?
For some people, I go to their houses and I'm with them in the evenings and at night while they are trying to get some rest, and just giving them an extra pair of hands to care for their baby at night. Sometimes I go over to the house and I help them do their first bath with baby because they've never done it before. Other times I go over to people's houses and I do a survey with them, even, about what they have in the space, what they need to have, what they don't need to have, what kinds of products they're using, what those products include and may do, and that kind of thing. So what decisions they're making in terms of how they're parenting their children, and products and clothes and all kinds of things. So it's a pretty broad spectrum.
And a necessary spectrum, I would imagine.
Yep, because those babies are slippery when they're wet.
They can be. Thank God I never dropped Josiah at all. I was good on that. I will have some little aside where I was maybe a little negligent when he was out of the tub, and I ran out of my room very quickly and had him on the bed. And literally, I didn't know I was this athletic, dove in the floor and caught him as he was rolling off.
It's amazing how those instincts kick in.
It happens very quickly. And then you're helping in terms of feeding.
Yes, absolutely. So if they're planning to feed the baby from their body, then that is a skill set that I do have, having done it myself, having been a volunteer with La Leche League International, which is an organization of peers supporting other peers who are feeding their babies from their body. So I have that opportunity to do that as well. Excuse me, whether they're wanting to do both feeding from their body and using bottles, whether it's human milk they're feeding or infant formula they're using, how to navigate how to do that, how to teach our babies how to use an artificial nipple and the human nipple and not get confused between the two, and those kinds of things. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
For granted, I wouldn't even know. I mean, obviously, because mine only poor thing had to have an artificial nipple.
Right.
And then finally, the parenting piece. That seems to me to be probably the most broad piece there.
It is the most,
because that's the lifetime situation. The baby, you'll only be a baby for a little while,
right?
But parents are going to be parenting for many, many years,
right? And so if we have the opportunity before baby's born, and we spend some time talking about how they would like to set that up to support themselves after baby's born. Sometimes it's just a meeting of us every 3 to 6 weeks where we get on a call, or if they're local, where I come to them and we sit down and we, baby can be present. Baby doesn't need to be with a babysitter or anything else. Meet baby's needs, because that can be incorporated into the conversation if there's parts that you're struggling with. But it can be really from the beginning. Sometimes it's about reminding them and talking to them about how to stay a couple. If there are two parents involved, how do we stay a couple and on the same page? How do we listen to each other? How do we communicate with each other? How do we hear what the other person's saying? And so reminding them to listen to understand, not listen to respond, because we're tired when we've got new babies. Yeah. It's exhausting. Oh, yes, it's exhausting. We are working 24/7. We are trying to figure out ourselves as well as this new human that needs us all the time. And so sometimes what thoughts are in our head, whether they're kind or unkind, don't get translated well out of our mouths, because we're often just sort of speaking instead of giving a lot of thought to what we're saying. And so sometimes one person's actions are disempowering of another person's, or unsupportive of another person's, or not respecting another person's. So it's sometimes a matter of sitting down and really spending the time chatting about, how do I hear the role that my partner wants to play? Mm-hmm. And that goes both ways. Yeah. Whether they're a cisgendered heterosexual couple, a same-sex couple, and everything in between. How do we see ourselves parenting? How does our partner see themselves parenting? How can I support them on that journey? How can I support myself on my journey? Have I articulated well what my expectations are so that they can understand that? Or have I just assumed that they know what it is that I want? So those conversations, I usually call them Friday night date nights, where they sit back to back and each person takes a good 5 minutes to talk about whatever they need to talk about. And you don't respond. The non-talker doesn't respond. They don't listen, or they don't speak. They don't react. They just listen. This week I loved it when you did this. I really struggled when this happened. I needed to know that I could do this. I wish that you trusted me when I tried that. And then at the end of 5 minutes, the other person starts talking, not in response to what the first person talked about, but what their experience over the week was. And then afterwards, respectfully talking to each other about the things that came up through the conversation and how they could better support one another. Because sometimes we don't know that the other person is feeling a way because we're so busy in our own stuff that we haven't paid attention to what they're struggling with and what they're going through. And I see this often when one parent goes out of the house to work and the other one is home with baby. The person who's home with baby feels like they have all of the baby responsibilities. They have to do it all. They're expected to do it all. And the person who goes outside of the house feels like the person who's home doesn't trust that they can do some of the things and that they want to do some of the things. And so that when they get home from work, sometimes they want to take the baby, they want to hold the baby, they want to care for baby, they want that time one-on-one with baby. Those kinds of conversations, sometimes we forget to have them. And then you add family to that, because outside sources and outside forces often have all kinds of feelings and comments and everything else. It can truly influence the dynamics within the house. So you take a stereotypical old school European family, and the expectation is that the person who birthed has to do all of this baby stuff, and that the person who didn't can't understand how to. So, and that the person who didn't birth is expected to take on all of the other chores, the cooking, the cleaning, the blah, 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 right? So it's just helping them decide how they want to parent, and then helping to support them through that process as it changes and evolves, as babies' food patterns change, as their sleep patterns change, as their communication skills change, as their motor skills change, all of that. So it goes on over time, over years.
So you're also a couples therapist.
It ends up probably feeling like that.
It sounds, because those things are very necessary in the end, because I do know that is a very strenuous time for any family. This has been incredible. I have learned a lot, and I'm going to go somewhere. I feel like I need to go get a certificate. I mean, it's been most incredible, most enlightening. And I've learned a lot, and it is my hope and my prayer that those who have listened today have also learned a lot. No, Sam is not here in the United States, but Sam is in Canada. And I would say, let me ask you this, Sam, are you able to support people who are here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. A lot of my clientele is from the US. And I think in part that comes from just because I focus on the queer community. And so queer individuals are looking for people, doesn't matter where they are, that can support them on in their journey. But also because, we talked about healthcare earlier. Healthcare in Canada, people are expect to have so many services for free. And in the US, that's not a gift that you're able to, so it's not unexpected to have to pay out of pocket for some services, and the support is definitely one of them. So I find that there's a lot of Americans that reach out to me just because I offer a service that they know they need, and they're more than willing to pay for because they need the support.
Absolutely. As we close out, I always like to ask my guests if there is something that they want to impart to listeners, because we obviously will have listeners who are in varying stages of this whole family world in terms of creating family. They might already have the children, but what is it that is Sam's philosophy? What is it that you want to just sprinkle on the people?
That you know your family best. And if you're with a partner, the two of you know your family unit best. That your best friend from high school, your cousin, your auntie, your mom, your uncle, your dad love you dearly. But at the end of the day, the people who matter the most are the people in your immediate core family, whether it's the family you're creating or it's the family you've already got and have created already. But trust in that unit, and then let the people outside of that unit support who you are instead of tell you who you're supposed to be.
I can add nothing to that. Thank you. That is amazing. I want to thank you, Sam, for coming and speaking with us today, for pouring out, for being so open and all inclusive in this conversation. It's been most valuable, not only to myself, as I said personally, but I know to others. To our listeners, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us today. You can follow Journey to Josiah on all social media platforms. I will place all necessary links, so every way that you can connect with Sam and everything that she does, because she does it all, and somebody might stay out of divorce court on account of Sam. So I would suggest you reach out. But all of Sam's information will be in the description of this video. As always, this is my famous saying: always remember, adoption changes lives and brings worlds together. Talk to you next Friday, same time, same place. Take care. Talk to you real soon. Bye.
Family. our worlds together.